Welcome to a Deadzone tournament report, Desolation 2, from Franticon 2019. Hello there, and welcome to this tournament report, Deadzone. Now, it's been a little while, there haven't been that many Deadzone tournaments in my local area, and this one certainly wasn't in my local area at Franticon, but considering it was a two-day event with multiple tournaments, then it was certainly worth the trip. And for this event, I've got my lists here so I can go through exactly what I've got. There are two different lists required, one at 150 points, one at 200 points. As you look at this image from my first game at the start, you can see that I've taken my Rebs rather than the Plague, alternating between those two. So my 150 point list, which I will tell you about right now, I've gone for the Rebel Cell Leader, who we may have to go through the images a little bit. You can see hiding there the Sphere Cell Leader, and you can see it's surrounded by several troopers. Now, one interesting thing to note is that the Yindij in this list are actually just troopers. I just didn't have enough humans to fill those slots. So we've got some aliens taking those spots instead. You can also see there's a Teraton there with a Defender Shield. There is a Teraton Shock Trooper. There are two snipers in this small list there, hiding under there, and the rest are troopers. So, in terms of items, both the snipers have extra ammo, because there were points left over, and one of the rebel troopers has a stun grenade as well, which I decided to try out because it looks quite tasty, and I haven't really taken grenades in the past. So, we'll see how that goes. And in my 200 point list for games 3 and 4, then the changes that are made are the Rebel Cell Leader is going to be upgraded to Nikolovsky, the named character, who is very, very tasty in the stats department. A third sniper comes in. The Teraton Shock Trooper drops out and is replaced by a second regular Teraton with a Defender Shield. And a Survey Drone is added to potentially make use of Nikolovsky's splat ability should it survive long enough. And the number of troopers goes up from 5 to 6. And those are the main differences. There's a couple of the items switch as well. I think in the second list the ammo has to come out because there aren't enough points left over. So anyone who's watching this live, let me know if you've got any words of tactical insight perhaps, or any questions. So let's just go back to this first image here of the table. Now, the terrain, it wasn't as elaborate as I thought it would be, all the various terrain boards at this event. It was all pretty much the standard, here's a flat mat basically with some buildings on it. All the boards essentially were like that. Some had more terrain on than others, and some of the terrain obviously looked better than others, but mostly it was just that. So the south have got some work to do to catch up with the north. I'm not just talking about my own terrain board, which couldn't make the journey to this event for logistic reasons, but in the north, at the tournaments that I've been to at least, there tends to be usually at least 4 or 5 kind of built up or otherwise crazy terrain setups. There's also, at an event I went to at, I think it was at Black Dragon as well, which is in around the Leicester area, that had a bit more elaborate terrain as well. So people in the south of England, you need to start building some exciting terrain boards to put all your lovely buildings on top of, to add a bit of spice and variety. So let's dive into game 1 then, shall we? This was, which scenario was it? It was Control, and it's against Maison Labs. So obviously you could see by my deployment that I've set up in the bottom right there, and spread out a little bit, not too much, and there's a 2-point objective there, and a 2-point objective there, and there are a couple of 1-point objectives around as well. So Maison Labs, very interesting army. There is an aberration there with horns, and there are lots of the regular troops in that tower, and there are some underneath that you can just see through the window there. There's one character with a kind of a little cattle prod. I'm not intimately familiar with the Maison Labs units though. And you can see the command dice here. I haven't taken too many pictures of command dice and not too much intimate detail during this tournament because it was on quite a tight time frame, and Deadzone isn't really a game that lends itself to having a long pause to take pictures, but it's very, very back and forth and lots of dice rolling throughout the game. You don't normally have any time to just take all the pictures you would want to, like you would in Kings of War, for example. So there's going to be a bit lacking on the visual front, but I'll try to make up for it with my wonderful weaving of tales via words instead of pictures. So you can see that early on in the game I've jumped my snipers up. The Reb snipers, of course, being very, very handy for just hopping up onto terrain because their sniper rifles are only light, and then shooting out, and possibly, if you've got a move dice as well, moving them back into cover if there's something for them to be scared of, but there isn't that much to worry me in this enemy list. I think there is a grenade launcher possibly, but there's no really ridiculous long-range firepower like a mortar or a sniper rifle to worry about. And you can see that the enemy, that's a very scary looking aberration there, in the 200 point list for this particular force, then the second aberration is going to be added as well. So the Teraton is really my main hitting force that's going to be jumping out into the middle of the battlefield and taking the fight to the enemy. I think Teraton Shock Trooper actually dropped into this cube first and was mercilessly butchered by a couple of the Mason Labs plague victims, and then the regular Teraton jumped in there and got some swift revenge. So the main thing with this Teraton, I just want to keep it away from the aberration. And you can see that an aberration is down there. That's not dead though, it's as a result of it being pinned. And you can see that I'm keeping people within striking distance of those objectives, because one thing, oh, Steve is in the chat, how's the lights? Well, the lights are still flickering on and off occasionally, but we'll see. It adds a bit of a spooky effect regardless, so I don't think people will mind that. Anytime you've got expendable models like these rebel troopers that are very inexpensive in points, then it's tempting to just throw them onto the objectives early, rack up some points and then die. But not always the best move. If you've got enough of them, you can kind of stagger their approach like this. I've got one of them in the cube, thrown in late so nothing can counter it, and then kill it once it's already in there. There are certain things that would be able to possibly shoot at it once it comes out of its cover. But the other one has climbed up there, and the enemy, depending how many guns and how many activations they have, obviously have a choice of whether to kill one that's already on an objective or one that's in a good shooting vantage point. So you don't want to have all your expendable troops in the same area when they could all potentially get killed together. You want to spread them out a bit, make the enemy have to choose which one to kill. And then if you're activating last, you can save something really cheap and terrible possibly until the end, and then just dive on an objective with the last activation of the round. So you can see I'm in the lead, and you'll find that there aren't many pictures of this game at all, because look at that, that's the next picture, the end of the game. So if we go back, I can tell you pretty much what happened. So this Teraton ends up fighting those two plague victims in there for a while, and eventually wins. And this area here is actually where the game was decided, because behind that ladder there was an enemy, and at the end of the game you could see, in fact I'll just show you the final score again so you can see how close it was. It was 16-14 win for me. 16 is the victory threshold at 150 points in Deadzone, and you can see I was actually slightly behind going into that final round. Well, okay, not slightly behind, but you could see that it had been clawed back, shall we say, by the Mason Labs in the third round. So in the fourth round the momentum was against me, but in this area here there was an enemy poised to jump down onto that 2-point objective that would have won the game for the Labs. However, I had a stun grenade saved up. I was saving it for the aberration, but the aberration never really got close enough to this area to threaten the result of the game. So I was able to lob that stun grenade onto the Mason Lab troop that was about to jump down onto the objective, and then I was then able to quite happily live on the objective and claim the 2 points that ultimately won the game. So stun grenade came in very, very handy there. on to the next game. Now this isn't going to be the most in-depth report, as I said. It's not going to be a huge number of pictures, but this is the Occupy scenario, which means there are 4 2-point objectives right in the middle of the table there. So everyone's going to have to pile in, and I'm against the Veermin. This terrain goes quite nicely with my troops, apart from the bits that look decidedly unpainted. The rest of it is nice and purple. So you can see that I've tried to hide as much as possible because the Veermin do have a few tasty weapons. That one on top of the building there has some kind of rat-like sniper rifle. There's also a nightmare with drill. There is I think it's called a crawler, the big nasty thing that crawls, oddly enough. And then loads of regular Veermin, and there's also a progenitor as well as the leader. So there's the central area, and there's nothing to prevent the really big gribbly stuff from getting in there, so it could just turn into a huge brawl in the middle, and that is ultimately what it starts turning into, because my Teraton gets in there, who's very hard to shift with the Defender Shield, Armour 2 with Tough. A bit of a nightmare to kill. Speaking of nightmare, the nightmare with the drill up there, and the Veermin are just kind of throwing rats in there to get 2 victory points and then die, because they're expendable like that. And oh, look at that, bit of an action shot there, an enemy hand entering the picture. You can see that my troopers, they don't like their chances at fighting against the regular Veermin, so they're just standing back and shooting down. And you can see that I am in the lead though at this stage. And the brawl gets even messier because that nightmare is in there, and it's only my Teraton there, but he's not too worried about anything. I think that should be she, actually. I think the female Teratons are the bigger ones, and the Teraton shock troopers are the males. I believe that's correct, with my in-depth knowledge of the Warpath universe fluff there. So my Teraton shock trooper has gone into the fight as well, because in scenarios like this where there are so many really valuable objectives, you can't allow your opponent just to sit on them and claim all the points for even one turn, because the game is almost out of reach by that point. You can't give up 8 victory points, especially when it's a race to 16. Then you really have to make sure that you're not letting them run away with the lead there. You can see that my leader is just hiding, because the splat for the rebel cell leader is quite useful, which is the one that allows you to switch the stats over. So if someone were to attack a sniper in close combat, for example, you could use the shoot stat for a survive or a fight. And that cube is actually on fire though, with the sniper and a trooper in it. So as soon as the sniper activates, I'm concerned that it will die horribly. That was what set it on fire. I'm not sure. Whichever one of these hideous rats has a flame weapon of some description, but my leader is hiding because despite having a decent weapon with AP on it, then the cell leader is not the most survivable, so hiding is probably advisable. I think I killed the enemy sniper very early in this game. Still slightly in the lead after round 2, but we're both racking up some points here. And then it continues on like this. You can see I've started to control more of the middle now. I've got some troopers down in there to fight. And that is actually how it's going to end. So it ends 16 to the enemy, 17 to me, which means it's a draw because we both passed the 16 threshold at the same time. And that, I believe that was the scene at the end of the game. So lots of models in the scoring areas, but I think the model there that you can see next to the pipe for the Veermin is actually the leader, the progenitor, who was weighing up whether to attack certain models of mine. It could have kamikazed into the Teraton, but chose not to, and chose to instead just claim those 2 points there, which made it a draw. Going in there, I was concerned though that the progenitor was going to attack the trooper who was sharing a cube with the Teraton, which would have meant the Teraton couldn't then do the fighting. But again, that wouldn't have necessarily changed the result. So it was a bit of a tricky one. And these scenarios with the high scoring objectives can end quickly and suddenly, especially if one side is able to dominate the area. So we both had to pile in there, and we ended up both racking up points pretty quick. So we both beat the threshold within 3 turns. So there you go. So I think I may have lost my leader in this game, but I didn't kill the enemy leader. I can't remember though. You get a bonus tournament point for killing enemy leaders. The way it's scored as well, you get 3 points for a win, 2 for a draw, 1 for a loss, I think, and then you also get points based on how many victory points you got. So even if you lose, but you scored quite a few victory points, you can get bonus points for that. And if you win, then obviously you're going to get the maximum bonus for the victory points, because the bonus doesn't extend beyond the winning threshold. It's quite a complicated system. I didn't actually read the tournament pack until a few hours ago, when I was just doing a little bit of research before I did this video. You should always read the tournament pack though, folks. Okay, we're going into the next game now, and I don't think I've written down the name of the scenario here, but it may be Divide and Conquer, this one may be called. And you can see that there are 2 objectives on either side, both worth 2, so similar to the last scenario, but the objectives are spread out rather than all in the centre, and the setup is different. You can put a few of your units further forward slightly. Now, we had the option to choose our own tables, essentially, and I wasn't picking them based on the terrain therein. I was picking them based on how much space is there either side of the table, either side of the board, for all the paraphernalia and drinks and dice and so on, and how much space there was between the tables for chairs and such. So had I been thinking a bit more strategically, I may have specifically looked for a table that had more terrain on it, because snipers like a nice tower with a roof on top to hide, but there weren't any available on this table, and you'll see why that's a problem in a second. I'm against the Marauders, and what they have is, which we'll get to in a moment, but this is the first game with my 200-point list, so Nikolovsky is coming out to play, not the Rebel Cell leader anymore. You can see I've got a Teraton hiding under there, but is that going to make a difference? No, because there is a mortar on the Marauder side, and that's not good, because there's not much terrain to hide under here, and everything seems to have a hole in it. Like that floor there, you can see there's a hole that you can just about see the Teraton through there, and there's something else hiding down there as well. I'm keeping anything valuable either in a cube on its own to make it a less enticing target, or with a Teraton whose defender shield can give it more armour. So I don't want to put my sniper, for example, in a cube with other models, because that makes it the instant mortar target, and snipers are fairly likely to be killed by them. So you can see that one of my troopers has still got the stun grenade there. So I imagine, obviously, the first mortar target would be 3 troopers in a cube together. But I don't really have much choice, because if I put troopers in with the snipers, then that's going to be the instant target. So I've got Nikolovsky hiding on the right with the Teraton, and there's a sniper inside the cube underneath the drone. I've got a sniper on the roof. And what makes this whole situation a little bit worse is that the Marauders win the recon test. They're going to be going first, and they have a shoot dice and an activation dice. So that means I could potentially lose quite a few models instantly as soon as the game starts to mortar fire. And look at that, that's exactly what happens. Sniper dead. All 3 troopers in that cube were killed by a single blast. So this is going to be a bit of an uphill struggle. Dicey Guy says, wait, got a drone? Yes. Drones, some people like them in general, but in the Nikolovsky list, they're a bit better, because you can use a splat to give them boom and then kind of kamikaze them into the enemy. So, the mortar is getting line of sight apparently. I didn't actually crouch down to look, but I was assured there was a hole in the door somewhere that the mortar could see through, so it was getting easier shots onto my troops across the table. But of course that did mean I was able to then shoot back at the mortar as well, because it was visible. With my plague mortars, I've always tended to hide them, but there is definitely some merit to giving them line of sight and risking them being shot back, because they can take a few points of damage, and landing the easier shots. So, other than just mortaring off half my troops and killing a sniper before I'd had a chance to activate, my Teratons both got pinned as well by mortar fire and various other weapons, which meant that I had nothing that could even get in range to threaten these Moor Beasts as they jumped on the 2-point objectives. So not only have I lost about half my force instantly, but I can't physically do anything about this angry, mutated dog situation. So that means I'm going to be down a ton of victory points after turn 1, and there's nothing really that I could have done about it. I didn't really have any input into the start of the game, since there were 3 or 4 activations, essentially, if you count shooting twice as 2, before I had a chance to activate. So it was very, very difficult opening to the game, and that's how much is dead fairly early. You can see that Nikolovsky dies as well. So yeah, not a lot of places to hide. But I do start wounding an orc. Was there any picture between there? So let me just have a look, because I'm not sure if I took a picture of the score sheet. So after the first turn, I was down 14-3 in points, and it's the first to 20 at 200 points. So yeah, it was pretty obvious that the game was going to be over in turn 2, because I couldn't possibly remove all those Moor Beasts from the objectives. I just didn't have enough models alive or unpinned to physically reach that point or do anything effective to them. So I had to concentrate on one side really, and just try and rack up points for myself so that I could get more bonus points later on. So my Teraton, ultimately, this one manages to get its act together and get across the table and jump up there, but doesn't manage to kill an orc wielding a big, terrible, I think it's a Polaris cannon, which also did a load of damage in addition to the mortar, and there's a Moor Beast up there fighting as well. And here you can see there's not that much to be seen. I've got a trooper up on the roof just to get a bit of a height advantage shooting down. And yeah, there we go. The game's going to be over, because I did take over. If we look back here, you can see on the right, just under my face, here there is a rebel trooper just there, sitting on one of the 2-point objectives, and I believe that's where it is, and also down in front of it I've got another model on the 2-point objective there. So I am racking up some points just because I want the bonus points, and I'm guaranteed to lose at the end of this turn anyway. So I kill the dogs on that side, just focus everything over there and ignore the left. So obviously my opponent was able to get more points, inflict more kills, but I did rack up some points. So 27-13. So I actually got a reasonable amount of points for that loss. But I didn't kill the leader, and I did lose my leader just because there was literally nowhere to hide from the mortar and all the other hideous weapons of mass destruction available to the marauders in that game. So that was a very difficult one. And it does happen though in tournaments. I've had it a few times where the table isn't necessarily very favourable to what you've got, and the opponent wins the recon test, goes first, has a shoot dice, 2 shoot dice sometimes, and has an activation dice, so they're able to shoot and kill 4 or more models if they have mortars, 4 or more before you've even activated anything. So, and of course that kind of thing has gone in my favour once or twice in the past as well, when I've taken my double plague mortar list. And if I've gone first and got an activation dice and a couple of shoot dice, I can just fire off 4 mortar shells before anyone's had a chance to do anything. And of course I'm no stranger to murder birds either, who can get straight into the action in turn 1 sometimes with move dice. So Steve says, game 3 I also lost 4 models in one shot against GCPS mortar. Yep, sometimes if you take a lot of models, you have to put a fair few of them into the same cube based on the deployment layout of the scenario, and before you've had a chance to move them, those mortars can go off, and it's a bad time. Okay, the next scenario, I can't remember what it's called, but I'm actually against Maison Labs again, and this is the same player that I faced in round 1, but with our bigger lists now. So even juicier, there are 2 aberrations, and it is the scenario that every tournament player should hate and should demand that is never used in a tournament ever again. But I can't remember the name of it. It's the one where you deploy in opposite corners with your force, and then your opponent uses the other 2 corners to deploy. So you have to either reach across the table, across all these delicate buildings, and knock things over with your big wargamer forearms, or you have to walk all the way around to the other side of the table to do your deployment and to look at lines of sight for your models, and it's just a complete nightmare logistically at a tournament. unless you have a huge amount of space. So if you get this scenario, try and get an end table so you can walk around easily. The scenario was scatter. Okay, yeah, that's what it's called. So yeah, it's just a total nightmare, this scenario, and I would be very pleased if tournament organisers would stop using it, because as interesting as the deployment layout is, it does not suit tournament halls or gaming centres where you have lots of games going on next to each other at a time and you have to walk around both sides of the table repeatedly and reach across. It's just a nightmare. But that aside, it still can produce an interesting game. So let's have a look what we've got here. The aberration is actually on the level below, the aberration on the left there that's kind of blending in with the yellow terrain. It should be underneath, but it wouldn't fit because there's a bit of piping there, but it physically can be in there. We just didn't want to have to break the model or the terrain to physically move it. So it's supposed to be in there. And my layout on this side, I've got a sniper hiding in there with a Teraton to get the bonus for the shield. I've got a sniper hiding down at the back there. Underneath I've got Nikolovsky. And there's my opponent's layout there. Steve agrees with me on this scenario for tournament use. It's a big no-no. Over in the opposite corner I've got my drone, I've got some troopers on the roof, and I've got some snipers hiding over there as well. And over on that side, my enemy has another aberration is over there, but it's not really visible at this stage. You can see actually one enemy troop of some description next to that pipe. And I wanted the high ground with my troopers because they're not the best at shooting. They're alright, but if you can get them on high ground and get that extra dice, it does make them definitely much more useful. And also I can use that high ground for my snipers. In this game there's quite a bit of height. So this is one of the taller boards that was available on the day. And you can see I've got a sniper on the roof there who has been wounded. But with the rebel snipers, of course, because they are light sniper rifles, you can climb up, shoot, and then either use a shoot dice to have another shot, which I often do, or a move dice to hide again. So taking 2 shots is very, very handy after moving, whereas most racist snipers are forced to move and then use a shoot dice to shoot once, or a move dice to move and then shoot, and then you can't use a move dice and a shoot dice in the same turn. So unless they're already in a position to fire, which is dangerous as a sniper because enemies are going to be looking right at you, then the rebel ones definitely have the edge in sniper versus sniper action. You can see the aberration on the ground there next to the white building with the yellow stripe on it. And I do not want to go down there and engage that at all, but that's where the objectives are. But they're only worth 1 each, so it's not as big a deal as in some of the other scenarios where they're worth 2 and you would have to get in there and engage to just stop them auto-winning the game. So I'm quite happy to sit on the high ground and take pot shots down and pick off the enemy models so that later on in the game I've got more chance to kind of split and get the objectives without the aberrations being able to kill everything. So you can see over here, I actually kill the enemy leader with one of my first activations of the game. I jump my sniper up into, I think it was the 2nd floor of this tower, or maybe even the top floor, and shoot down onto the enemy leader with the extra dice for height, and it being a sniper rifle, you get the bonus as well, of course. So the enemy leader died really, really fast, so that was a big advantage for me. This scenario as well, most of the terrain gives you nowhere to hide in this scenario, because most of the terrain is set up as if you're going to be fighting one end to the other. So when you have to face 2 different directions, there's very little cover, so it's very, very difficult. So you can see I've got a Teraton that's been pinned over there, and that was probably with a grenade launcher. I think there's a grenade launcher in the bottom left of the screen there. And so my Teraton on the top right there, let's see, which way is it? That way. There is a Teraton right there. The Teraton has got up there and has mauled some enemies to death, smashed them to bits. And you can see I've got troopers scattered around the place, mostly on high ground. And I've got another Teraton on top of the yellow tower, kind of in the middle, because it's safer up there, further away from the aberrations who are currently on objectives. And I've also used a stun grenade at some point during the game on the aberration you can just see between the yellow striped white building and the dirty yellow building, you can just see it poking out down there. I used a stun grenade on that at one point to stop it activating for a turn, which is a huge deal with a model that potent. And as we're getting into the game here, you can see it's very, very close on points. And this is bad news for a sniper. Aberration climbs up. I think I may have had 2 models in there. If I didn't, then the first attack did not kill the sniper just by pure luck. And the sniper does not want to then activate and do anything, because that will mean the aberration will be able to rip the sniper's head off. And you can see the aberration on the left there has gone up to just start hunting down my troopers because they were being annoying, and I've got a Teraton in an objective cube there. So, with the aberration being speed 2, my opponent does get a move dice at one point, and when you see an aberration with a move dice, your eyes quickly start scanning the battlefield and you think, okay, who is in range of this ultimate killing machine, and I want to get them out of there as quick as possible. So that Teraton is not going to stay there. And you can actually see in the bottom right that Nikolovsky has climbed up onto a bridge, which is one of the few places where you're very safe from an aberration because they can't physically fit onto a half cube, and is just open-shotting it in the back. And with Nikolovsky you have a choice of using the AP2 magma rifle, which will punch through the armour of course, and you've also got the toxic pistol, which is handy for anything that lacks armour but is very large, because you only have to do 1 point of damage to kill it. But Nikolovsky does not kill that aberration on this occasion. But I think my sniper is dead by this point. And you can see over here, I've just got too many troopers alive. Because my snipers have been picking off the enemy troops, the aberrations are pretty much the only things left, so I'm going to be able to dance around them and pick up points, hopefully. But will it be enough to win the game? Well, there's a spoiler alert, yes it is, because what happened was, in the final turn, the aberration that was over here, this one, jumped onto the objective, which you can just see. You can see the little red circle beneath the blades of that fan on the left. The aberration got down into there to claim the objective, but Nikolovsky, who had repositioned by this point over to the left, from high ground was able to get an open shot at the aberration, and with a shoot dice was able to take 2 shots at it and killed it in the final turn, which gave me just enough victory points to win, to get beyond 20 at 23, and prevented my opponent from gaining the 1 victory point required to also reach the threshold via the aberration being in the objectives cube, which would have given Mason Labs the win, unless I'd managed to kill something else. But look at that, very, very close indeed. And that means that at the end of the day, the Rebs are going to end with 2 wins, a draw and a loss, which I think is a very respectable performance, and I think there were about 30 players, something like that, and I finished 10th, which is very, very respectable, I think, and a much better performance than the last time I took Rebs to a tournament, certainly. I haven't done very well with them at events before, but this time, adding the Teratons with Defender Shields, they are like the total MVPs of this list. And what else did well? The snipers are obviously amazing. You can't go wrong with multiple snipers, especially Reb ones that don't have any limitations on moving and then shooting. The Rebel Troopers, they do alright. They're only there to fill up the slots so I can take more of the exciting specialists. But the Survey Drone didn't really get a chance to do much because it was killed. Nikolovsky, obviously really good, more survivable than your average leader due to having armour. And the guns are obviously insanely good. Toxic Pistol and an AP2 range 6 Magma Lance, which is actually, let's see, 1 better range than the Rebel Cell Leader's Magma Lance. And the Rebel Cell Leader, of course, doesn't have any armour, but does have a more enticing splat. So, interesting. I don't know whether I'm going to use Rebs again at the next event, whenever that is. I'll probably go back to Plague for that one. But I'm sure the Rebs will see some action at some point in the near future. So, anyone got any more comments? Drop them in, and I'll just talk overall about the tournament. So, I was mentioned earlier about the terrain, and how I would have liked to see a bit more variety in terms of like more complicated builds than just the actual battle zone structures. So that's the main point I would make. So I would say people in the south of England need to get to work, get some blue foam, start chopping it up, building some more elaborate setups, and preferably not exactly like mine, because I don't want to have only the second best kind of subterranean Deadzone terrain out there. There are so many things you can do with it though, even just with the Battlezone terrain. As you've seen with my terrain board, it's just one big square of foam in the middle with the Battlezone tiles around it to create that subterranean effect. So there's a lot you can do. There's a lot of people in the north who have, if you see my previous reports, you'll have seen at tournaments, there's a couple where it's just really big tall towers with platforms on top that you can access. Just really interesting stuff. So I think they maybe spread the terrain too thinly, arguably, at this event, because they did have a lot of Deadzone tables, way more than the actual number of players, I think. They were worried they weren't going to have enough, and I think once that call went out, everyone and their dog decided to bring some terrain. So there was definitely plenty. Dicey Guy says, which faction won, second and third? Some fun lists. Well, actually, I can look right now. Let me see, because the results did go up earlier on the old Facebook page. So I'm going to look at it right now. So the winning faction was Plague, and then the next three were all Marauders. The Marauders I lost to with the Mortar of Death finished fourth. And let's see, who finished last? Last was the 28 players, by the way. Forge Fathers finished in last place. Anything notable about these results? Let's see. See the people that played against me. So I lost to 4th place, I drew with 5th place, I finished 10th, and I defeated the person who finished 20th. He was both of my wins because I ended up playing the same person twice in the first and final round. So there you go. That is my thoughts on the results, which weren't very in-depth because I haven't played a huge amount of Deadzone recently. I'm not an expert on most of the factions. Marauders do seem to be very, very powerful. I often seem to struggle against them, so I would imagine they're kind of top tier at the moment. All the factions seem to be doing alright. All the Forge Fathers appear to be in the bottom half of the rankings, so I don't know whether that says anything about them. I have got some Forge Fathers that I want to be working on at some point soon. Let's see, anything else? What would you change in your list? Well, let's have a look again at my lists here. So, I've got a lot of options with the Rebs. They do have a lot of different specialists. There are things I didn't take, like Grogans, Craw, Z's, for instance, and who else? There are some weapon teams that they can take, missile launcher, and so on. But really, I don't think I would need to change that much, to be honest. I think this list is actually very good. I think the double Teraton with the Defender Shield make them ridiculously good. Lots of snipers is obviously ridiculously good. Nikolovsky, very good. The drone, I'm sure it's got its uses, but I didn't really manage to get the best out of it. I haven't really used them much before, so that's not surprising. And the Rebel Troopers, fine. Yeah, I don't see much I would change. I like keeping the stun grenade in both lists. It definitely helped me win 2 games, the stun grenade. The only times I was unable to use it effectively was when the trooper who was carrying it got killed prematurely, which isn't very nice. And the extra ammo on the snipers, that was in the lower level list, but not the higher. So that's obviously handy if you've got a juicy target at the start of the game, and you just want to get that extra dice in there just to guarantee a bit of red-hot searing death early on, then you can certainly do that. If you've got a couple of points left over, nothing wrong with throwing a little bit of ammo in there. In one of the lists, I didn't use up all my points. My lists were 150 and 199 points, so there was 1 point left on the table, and there wasn't really anything that I felt I could have included for that 1 point. It would have meant taking something out and putting something else in that just cost a single point more, and I felt that the list was already good enough. So I don't know whether I would make drastic changes to it at all, if anything. If anyone's got any suggestions, any Reb experts out there, perhaps let me know what you would consider changing if you had taken this list. And any other comments that people want to drop in as we look at my army there ready for battle, because we're going to wrap this one up shortly. And if you haven't already watched my Dreadball video from earlier on the Franticon Dreadball UK National Championship of Dreadball actually, then make sure you check that out, and there will be a full report on all my Kings of War games from the event as well. All 4 games, which were on the Sunday, Deadzone and Dreadball were on the Saturday. So, 12 games played by me, and I think they were all an awful lot of fun. It's good combining multiple different game systems over a period of time like that. So I imagine people do find it quite tiring, but it might be kind of mentally refreshing to, after a few games of one thing, switch to something else for the next day. I know some people did Kings of War doubles on one day and Kings of War singles on another, or Deadzone singles on one day and then a different kind of Deadzone on another day. But obviously that's good if you're only into one of the systems that's available there. Right, we're going to wrap this one up now. So, no medal or trophy or anything for this one, but 10th place, not bad. It's better than my last performance with Rebs, which was quite a while ago actually, because there aren't enough Deadzone tournaments, especially up round here. We need to do something about that, I think. Hopefully Vanguard hasn't muscled in on Deadzone's turf and just reduced the number of Deadzone tournaments by stealing some of them. When a new game system pops up, you would hope that would mean there would just be more events in general, not just the same number of events split over more systems. But we shall see as time goes on. Deadzone is definitely one of the most fun games, and it's one of the more interesting to look at games, shall we say, as well, when you're walking past and there's lots of interesting kind of 3-dimensional terrain, lots of upward motion in the games. It's not just all flat. So it makes it look more impressive to passers-by, I think, and could entice people in based on visuals alone with the exciting terrain possibilities. And I wonder if I should make any new Deadzone terrain at some point. At the moment, it seems like there's not much point because there aren't many Deadzone events now, and I could probably use some terrain that's more themed to other games that I play more often. For example, Kings of War, I should probably make some kind of snow forests to go with my snow terrain, because I play that constantly, and there are tons, just endless Kings of War tournaments around here in this general region. But we shall see. I do have some more Battlezone terrain in a box somewhere over there, which is still unbuilt, and I do want to add to my existing setup as well and possibly add some kind of video screen effect on there, as some people have been doing. Right. Dicey Guy loves Deadzone and Vanguard. Yes, you can love both, but not at the expense of each other. Make sure they both thrive. Okay, time to wrap this one up, folks. So, as you enjoy what I've done with this image and just added the word report on there with Photoshop, my legendary Photoshop skills, then don't forget to check out all the links in the description. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter, join my Facebook group to keep up to date with all the goings on this channel and my armies and my tournament endeavours and so on. Don't forget to throw all your money at me, of course, bankrupt yourself so that I can put out more hours of entertainment. And Steve says prefer Deadzone to Vanguard. Yes, I'm definitely in that boat as well at the moment, and Dicey Guy likes them both. But I would say I would have to play more Vanguard to give it a fair assessment, because I've played a lot more Deadzone than I have Vanguard, so I'm probably biased at this stage. Okay, time to go. And don't forget, good night out there, whatever you are.